Hey everyone, have you ever stopped to wonder how a tiny seed can grow into a massive tree? Or, how a lion gets all that energy to run and hunt? Well, it all boils down to two super important ideas, how energy moves and how materials get recycled. Today, we're going to break down this incredible engine that powers pretty much all life on Earth.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the absolute basics of energy. Then we'll follow its journey through an ecosystem. After that, we'll dive into how nature does this amazing job of recycling its key ingredients. By the time we're done, you'll see exactly how these two processes work together to support everything, from the tiniest microbe to the biggest whale.
All right, let's jump right into our first section. To really get how energy flows, we first need to be super clear on what energy actually is.
So, at its simplest, energy is just the power to do stuff or make things change. You can't hold it or weigh it, but you can see what it does all around you. It's the heat that boils water, the electricity that lights up your room, and the force that gets a car moving. It's basically the engine of everything.
Okay, so this is energy in action. Think about a car speeding down the road, the warmth coming off a bonfire, or the light from the sun. That's all kinetic energy. Basically, if something's moving, it's got kinetic energy.
And here's the other side of the coin, potential energy. This is energy that's just stored up, waiting to be used. The chemical energy inside an apple or in a fully charged battery, that's potential energy. It's not doing anything right this second, but it has the potential to be released and make something happen.
The really key thing to get here is the difference between now and later. Kinetic energy is happening right now. Potential energy is stored up, waiting for its big moment. Think about an apple hanging on a tree. It's just sitting there, full of potential energy. But the second it falls, that potential energy instantly converts into the kinetic energy of its fall.
Okay, so we've got the basics down. Now let's see how this energy actually moves through an ecosystem. It's not just a random free-for-all. It actually follows a really specific path that's governed by some basic laws of nature.
I want you to picture a food ladder. Each step on this ladder is what we call a trophic level. Right at the bottom, on the first step, you've got producers, like plants, that get their energy straight from the sun. The next step up, that's the herbivores who eat the plants. And above them, you have the carnivores that eat the herbivores. Each step up is a different trophic level. Now, this is where it gets really fascinating. As you can see from this table, moving up that food ladder is, well, it's not very efficient. Just look at how much energy is lost at each level. The producers, plants, they lose about 21% of their energy just by, living. The herbivores that eat them lose even more, and the carnivores up top lose the most. This energy doesn't just disappear. It gets used for breathing, moving, and staying warm, and a whole lot of it is just lost as heat.
This brings us to a really famous idea in ecology called the 10% rule. On average, only about 10% of the energy from one level actually makes it into the bodies of the creatures on the next level. The other 90% is used up or lost as heat. This is exactly why an ecosystem can have tons and tons of plants, a smaller number of zebras, and only a very few lions. There just isn't enough energy left at the top to support a huge population.
The whole thing is run by two basic laws of physics. First, the first law says you can't create or destroy energy. You can only change its form, like when sunlight gets converted into chemical energy in a plant. But it's the second law that explains that 90% loss. It says that every single time energy changes form, some of it gets away as unusable heat. It's why energy flows on a one-way street through an ecosystem. It comes from the sun, goes through the food chain, and then it's gone as heat. You can't recycle it.
So we've figured out that energy is on a one-way trip, and a lot of it gets lost along the way. But what paths does it take? Well, it turns out there are two main highways for energy to travel through an ecosystem.
This Y-shaped diagram shows the two paths perfectly. Think about it. Energy from the sun gets captured by plants at the bottom. From there, it can split and go in one of two directions. One branch of the Y is the grazing food chain, the classic idea of living things eating other living things. The other branch is the detritus food chain, which is all about breaking down dead stuff.
So let's break that down. The grazing chain is what we usually think of. A rabbit eats some grass, and a fox eats the rabbit. Easy enough. The detritus chain, though, is nature's amazing cleanup crew. It kicks off with dead stuff, like fallen leaves or dead animals. Decomposers, like bacteria and fungi, get to work breaking it all down. But here's the really important part. They're connected. When that fox eventually dies, its body becomes food for the detritus food chain. See how it works?
So we've seen that energy has a one-way ticket through the ecosystem. But what about the actual stuff that life is made of? The atoms of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus? Well, unlike energy, these things don't get lost. They get used over and over again. Let's take a look at how nature recycles these essential building blocks.
This is a huge fundamental difference. An ecosystem needs a constant supply of new energy from the sun, day in and day out. But the matter, the actual atoms that build our bodies, that's a finite resource. We only have so much on Earth, and that is why nature has these incredible self-sustaining cycles to reuse them again and again. Now let's zoom in on two of the most important cycles for life as we know it. We've got the carbon cycle, since carbon is the literal backbone of all life, and then there's the nitrogen cycle, which is totally essential for building things like proteins and DNA. You can think of the carbon cycle as having a fast lane and a slow lane. The fast lane is the biological part. This happens every day. Plants breathe in carbon dioxide, animals eat the plants, and they both breathe out carbon dioxide. Then you have the slow lane, the geochemical part. This is where carbon gets locked away for millions of years in places like the deep ocean, in rocks, or as fossil fuels.
Okay, the nitrogen cycle is a little more complex, and the real heroes here are bacteria. So here's the problem. Our air is almost 80% nitrogen gas, but plants and animals can't use it like that. The magic happens in step 1, nitrogen fixation, where some special bacteria turn that gas into something usable. Then, through other steps like nitrification, different bacteria get it ready for plants to absorb. Finally, another group of bacteria sends the nitrogen gas back to the atmosphere, completing the loop.
And for our last cycle, we've got something a little different. It's way slower than the others. And a key thing to remember is that it doesn't really involve the atmosphere. Let's check out the phosphorus cycle, which is all about a slow journey from rock to life and back again. The main thing to know here is that phosphorus starts in rocks. It only gets released into the soil and water when those rocks slowly break down over thousands or millions of years. Because this process is so slow, and because there's no big stash of it in the air like with carbon or nitrogen, phosphorus is often in short supply. Its availability can actually limit how much life an ecosystem can support, which is why we call it a limiting nutrient. So let's wrap this all up. If you only remember one thing from today, make it this. Energy flows, but matter cycles. Energy comes in from the sun, takes a one-way trip through the food chain, and then leaves us heat. But the physical stuff, the carbon, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, that gets used over and over and over again. It's this beautiful partnership that keeps our planet running.
And that brings us to a really big, important final thought. Now that we understand how these amazing natural systems work, we have to ask ourselves about our own role. When we burn fossil fuels, we're releasing tons of carbon that was locked away for millions of years. When we use industrial fertilizers, we're dumping huge amounts of extra nitrogen into the soil. How are we messing with these ancient, finely tuned cycles? It's a really important question to think about. For more clear explanations and daily IGNOU videos, subscribe to IGNOU Mind Decoded.